Mining played an important role in selling to the West. The beginning of the mining started with the California Gold Rush and lasted until the late 1800s. Prospectors started pouring in, coming from all over in search of gold, silver, and other minerals, hoping to get rich. Demand for minerals rose dramatically after the Civil War as the United States changed from a farming nation to an industrial nation. Mining in the West encouraged the building of railroads to connect the mines to factories back east. In 1859, a prospector named Henry Comstock staked claim in the 6 Mile Canyon near Virginia City, Nevada. He didn't find any gold. He soon became very frustrated and sold his claim. He neglected to realize that a sticky blue-gray material that made mining rather difficult was in fact silver ore. News of this traveled around the Virginia City. Prospectors began to come in from everywhere, so much so that Nevada became the 36th state. The Comstock load made over $230 million and helped the Union finance the Civil War. The news of a mineral strike was heard, and thousands of people came from all over. This caused small cities, much like Virginia City, to become what was known as boomtowns. Sadly, boomtowns did not last forever. Mines used to support the economy would eventually be used up and cause mines to go bust. Towns that were abandoned came to be known as ghost towns. Mining became very popular in the mid to late 1800s. Eventually, mining led to statehood. It spurred the development of Colorado, Arizona, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Montana. New technologies developed in mining. Placer mining was the process which miners would use shovels, picks, and pans. Other prospectors used sluice mining. Sluice mining was when prosecutors used pans and attracted water from riverbeds with minerals and dirt in them, and they would put the dirt and minerals into wooden boxes with riffle bars that caused heavier minerals to settle at the bottom. Soon deposits on the surface would begin to run out. Hydraulic mining became very popular. This was a process that used high-pressure water against hills and mountains in order to expose minerals. In certain parts of the Great Plains, it was hard to keep cattle around. In the east there was a water scarce, and they could not survive on the tough prairie land. Longhorns were descended from the Spanish cattle and introduced it 2 centuries earlier. Longhorns were able to survive in the open range of the Great Plains. Cattle were slaughtered in huge numbers to feed the armies of the Union and Confederacy. After the war, beef began to increase in sale. Ranchers rounded up their cattle and sent them on the railroads to Missouri. At first, the cattle did not survive the long drive, but the ones that survived sold for 10 times the amount in Texas. Cowboys had to end up branding their cattle to keep up with them. Stray calves that were not branded were called Marlboros. Herd numbers ranged from 2,000 to 5,000 cattle. Railroads began to stretch across the U.S. Cattle were being sent to slaughterhouses, and some were sold to cowboys. Sheep herders began to move the sheep in the range. This was taking up space, and the sheep were eating all the grass. Cowboys started to divide the range and put up barbed wire. There was such an oversupply of animals on the market, prices plummeted in the mid-1800s, and many ranchers went bankrupt. Many settlers had to build their homes from chunks of sod because there were no trees. In the open fields, vast herds of buffalo grazed on the prairie grass. Nomadic Native Americans hunted the buffalo for food and used buffalo hides for clothing and shelter. During the summer, the prairie had to face the frequent danger of fire. Also, during the winter, they had to be careful of the blizzards. When farmers went to plant the seeds, they had to make sure to get the seeds down far enough to get to the moisture. Farmers on the plains had to use plows, seed drills, reapers, and thresh machines. The wheat belt began at the eastern edge of the Great Plains and encompassed much of the Dakotas and parts of Nebraska and Kansas. Bonanza farmers formed companies, invested in property and equipment, and hired laborers as needed. After the Mexican War, its independence, the region became the Northern Territories of the Republic of Mexico. When the United States defeated Mexico in 1848 and took control of the region, it acquired the Spanish-speaking population living there. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ended the Mexican War. The region's residents retained their property rights and became American citizens. The landowners owned vast haciendas, which are large ranches that cover thousands of acres of land. Hispanic Californians were outnumbered when California's population grew dramatically. Hispanics were regulated to lower-paying jobs and less desirable jobs. Mexican Americans claimed land that was dated back to the Spanish land grant. Land ended up being taken illegally from the Mexican Americans. Farmers developed the tools and techniques for managing cattle. In 1889, a group of Hispanic New Mexicans called themselves Las Gorras Blancas and raided ranches that were owned by English speakers. It all stopped in 1890 when governors threatened to call in federal troops. As settlers entered Native American lands on the Great Plains, clashes grew more common. Conflict continued as the government tried to force Native Americans into reservations and encouraged them to assimilate into culture of the U.S. Many Native Americans lived in the Great Plains. Some of them lived in the community and worked as farmers and hunters, but most were nomads in search of buffalo. Ranchers, miners, and farmers began to come to the Great Plains. They started a feud with Native Americans. In 1862, the Dakota people, or the Sioux, launched a major uprising in Minnesota. The Sioux agreed to live on a reservation in exchange for annuities. However, annuities frequently caught up in bureaucracy and corruption, and Native Americans never received them. By 1852, many Native Americans lived in poverty and faced starvation. In the 1860s, tensions began to arise between the miners coming in to Colorado and the Cheyenne and Iroquois who already lived there. As the numbers in the miners increased, Native Americans began to raid wagon trains and stealing cattle and horses from ranchers. By the summer of 1864, dozens of homes had been burned, and about 200 settlers had been killed. The Cheyenne settlers asked for peace, but was declined, saying that they killed too many women and children to have peace. This became known as the Sand Creek Massacre. In 1867, Congress formed an Indian Peace Commission, which proposed creating two large reservations on the plains, one for the Sioux and another for the Native Americans on the southern plains. In 1876, the Battle of Little Bighorn began. General George Custer was turned on by the Native American forces. He had 210 soldiers, but lost all but one of them. The Nez Perce people were led by Chief Joseph. When the army came to relocate them, they fled for their homes and embarked on a journey for more than 1,300 miles. In 1877, Chief Joseph surrendered and they were exiled to Oklahoma.